Welcome to yet another conversation on your premium business show. That's Business We Define. Now, last week on Friday, the Kenya Revenue Authority released the tax performance outturn for the full year 2022-23, and we are delighted to have the Acting Commissioner General, that is Madam Rispah Simiyu. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Julians.
Rispah, let's start from here. I was combing through the numbers, and for us who have been tracking the performance month on month, it looks like June must have delivered quite a bumper collection, because 95.3%, granted you didn't hit the target, but given what we had seen earlier in the year, it looks like June was a very good collection month. If you could give us some flavor around how June looked like.
Thank you, Julians. Thank you for having me. June indeed was a very good month. Like you said, it could have been better, but it is what it is, and we were very excited by the numbers that we saw. Having worked through the year, and probably around May, we were cumulatively doing around 93.4, 94.9% cumulatively. But then in June, we closed with, we closed with 95, over 95%. But then June as a month delivered 98.1%. So we were shy of target by just a couple of billions. Now, June in itself the collection for June amounted to 220.6 billion, which again is a performance of 98.1%, and accumulative, basically a growth over collections for last year of 7.6%. What are the factors that drove this performance? Starting with Pay As You Earn. Pay As You Earn over the year, for the private sector, Pay As You Earn has been on an upward trajectory. It was a bit slow when it came to the public sector, but then particularly looking at June, Pay As You Earn performed at 107%, so above target. There's quite a bit of exchequer releases, and timely so, because sometimes when these disbursements are done, but they're done at the tail end, then we're not able to quickly convert them and to report for revenue in the very month. So again, a very good month. Looking at just overall, PAYE grew by 20%. And if you look at public and private sector, growing by 19.9% and 20% respectively. Now, that PAYE aside, there was withholding tax. Withholding tax has not been that positive throughout the year. Now, particularly looking at, again, June timely disbursements, especially to the counties, pending bills, again, another thorn in the flesh over time, but quite a bit was disbursed, and ours was to wait again to convert. So whatever it is that attracted withholding tax, then we quickly got into that space and converted into revenue. Domestic VAT. Domestic VAT, if you look at the performance for June, performed at 24.4 billion, and in percentage terms, 100.4% performance rate. This recorded a growth of 21.7% in the month. Now, if I give you a little bit of the history of VAT, it is one of the taxes we believe should be doing very exceptionally well, because every product, unless it is exempt, then VAT should come out of it, whether consumed by a grown-up or a baby, as long as it is not exempt. Now, VAT pre-TIMS, tax invoice management system, it was not doing very well. And you look at a period between July 2022 and say January 2023, we were doing an average of about 6.7% for VAT growth. Now, that was even with the introduction of the tax invoice management system. So with a little bit of history again on the tax invoice management system, a departure from the traditional ETR, which was largely manual. So going into TIMS, I'll call it for purposes of this interview, is that the purpose of the teams was for it to relay VAT either real time or near real time. But it ran into a few hurdles. One, it was a device-based system. So the taxpayers were expected to purchase a device, which was not exactly cheap, especially for the smaller taxpayers. And so because of that, there was a slower uptake than what we would have anticipated. So fast forward to February 2023, February this year, exactly. The growth just shot up. And looking again at that average, when we're talking about 21.7%, that gives us now overall growth of about 18% for VAT. So what changed? We still retained the same technology, the same concept of the real-time or near real-time transmission of VAT collected from the suppliers. But what changed then, we moved from the device-based to a software-based. Now, this one, again, a system process that is free.
That's the e-teams.
That is the e-teams, precisely. And with the e-teams, all you need to have is just a smart device. Whatever it is, it's a smart device, it is onboarded on that, and you're good to go. So that, again, we believe it actually was the key thing behind what drove our domestic VAT numbers. Then again, moving on to excise. Excise again, but specifically on airtime and financial services. On the excise manufacturing sector, not so good. That was a bit of a flat line, but we also saw dips in deliveries. But looking again on the side of airtime and financial services, largely banks, on the excisable products, again, that was on an upward trajectory. So largely and wholesome, looking at June as a month, it did well. Now, largely what I've talked about is domestic taxes. Looking at the customs side, customs, yes, it was a good run. Could have done better, again, over 95%, could have done better. A few things here and there that delayed, but I would say also could have done better. Quite a bit of exemptions coming through that also caused a dip in the numbers. But I think largely put, I would say June, we had a good run.
Domestic excise and domestic VAT, when I look at it comparably across years, I notice deceleration in the rate of growth. And when consumption taxes behave that way, it sends a very strong signal in terms of the state of the economy and how it's operating. One, is this a point of concern for you, seeing how consumption taxes performed in the year under review? And two, do you feel there are more leakages you could seal going forward?
Is it a cause for concern? Certainly it is. I've said it before that yes, we have seen an upward trajectory on the excise taxes. But then the questions that we've begun to ask ourselves, especially when it comes to excisable products, yeah? So not necessarily when you're talking about financial services and airtime, etc., but more our bigger concern is on the excisable products. And when you look at the manufacturing sector, we have noted deliveries, a dip in deliveries, even on certain lines that we had not seen, like the soft juices, to mention, just as an example. So yes, that is a conversation we are having even across with various stakeholders to look at, one, are the rates optimal? Are the rates right? Can we sustain them? But even as we are doing that, we have a big concern when it comes to leakages. So on the leakages side, as you rightly said, the issue of ethanol, this is a subject that has been discussed widely, in the sense that the excise duty, if you look at the excise duty rate in Kenya, it's pretty high compared to our neighbors. And as such, then that has created an avenue for people to then bring in the ethanol, yeah, excise duty on the ethanol, and of course then manufacture whatever products they are, so that they are not on our radar and we are not able then to collect that which we should collect. And more importantly, which is the bigger concern, is that these other, whether you call them second generation products or otherwise, then they eat into the market share of those who are rightly paying their share, their taxes. So I would say two things. One, even as we are reviewing the whole idea of how then do we apply excise duty, then there's a bigger conversation around sealing the leakages, looking at the illicit ethanol, looking at the rates across East Africa. How can we then harmonize those rates? And also from our from the customs side, because you see, customs is just not about collection of taxes and import duty. Customs also deals with border control. So how then do we work with other stakeholders to ensure that we have very good sight of what is coming into our country and what is leaving our country.
Okay. And staying with the subject of excise, one product in particular, based on the report we received, growth in collections from beer is up 0.4%. Never mind the 9.98% we saw in the adjustment of the excise. Do you feel, Madam CG, that as far as excise goes in this country, we potentially have missed the philosophy behind it? Because we are almost at a demand destruction point based on the numbers we've seen.
Again, Julian, I'll take you back to the very same conversation of what is optimal. Excise duty is collected globally. But then again, even in collecting excise duty, it's important that we also monitor the trend. And we have not buried our heads in the sand. We can see something is happening. So I think my view is that, again, it's a combination of both. Probably the bigger discussion of the Laffer curve. At what point then does it plateau? At what point have we reached optimal? Is it time to start dipping? And at the same time as you're dipping, what other measures are we putting in place? I know a lot is being done in that space, perhaps has not come to the fore, probably through Finance Act or other avenues. But I think it's not for me to say that at this point. I think we will continue working at it until then we have it right.
Staying with the consumption taxes, domestic VAT, I remember when we had the transition from ETR to TIMS, the immediate report we got from the authority was that the transition had been very impeccable for the large and medium-sized, but for the small businesses, the performance rate was about 43%. First is, as we stand today, how is it from a small business compliance with e-TIMS?
So like I said, TIMS started well, but could have been better. Now, if I take you back to TIMS. When you go to e-TIMS, you would have hoped, because the same problem, the problem that was being cited with TIMS is what we tried to resolve through e-TIMS, and especially for the MSMEs. Now, when that journey began, this sector, it was very slow. And you see, then it begs the question, was the issue really the cost of the gadget, or was it just reluctance to onboard? So what did we do as KRA? I would tell you, over time, and especially between May and in particular June, what we did, because we noted the slow growth, noting how the MSMEs are actually the biggest contributors as far as our taxes are concerned. In fact, biggest contributor to GDP, like I said, 44% to GDP. An employer of 15 million individuals. So you'd expect that MSMEs then would actually drive this growth. So we noted a slow pace of onboarding. But then what we did was we went back to the drawing board and asked ourselves, what can we do differently? And we introduced something administratively, what we call a special table. A special table has been in existence, and when I say special table, not not the wood table, but when I talk about a special table, is a category where we ring fence pins which we think could easily be abused, or people who are consistently filing nil or non-filers. All right? And it is to drive behavior change. So that has been used for the persistent nil and non-filers. But then around May, June, we extended it to drive e-TIMS onboarding. So what did we do? We picked all those taxpayers who had not onboarded, yet they have VAT as an obligation. And we moved them into the special table. What that then meant was that these taxpayers had to come forward, because you see, apart from the filing that they are doing, if at all, they needed to file their returns. Because in the absence of filing a return, it means then those are automatic penalties that start accruing. So you have to come forward so that then you explain yourself, you onboard on e-TIMS, and we remove you from the special table. That exercise in itself pushed their numbers by over 90,000 in a month. So indeed, it worked, the magic that we had hoped it would.
Okay. So, so as we speak, would you say what proportion of small businesses are now compliant?
Yes. Before the uptake of items, we were just doing about 64% of active small taxpayers. Right now, it's upward of 80%. Yeah.
There has been the long-running conversation, and you've already alluded to it, of the cleanup of the VAT register. How are we positioned with this right now? Because the concern was, if I could just walk you back, about 50% are either non-filers or nil filers.
Yes.
Yes.
That is an ongoing conversation. A few things have caused hiccup, because even as we are cleaning up the register, there are some taxpayers who would say, and rightly so, that a VAT obligation was placed on me, yet I don't have such transactions. Yeah, VATable transactions. Or I was not aware, or, various reasons. So then you're looking at a register which has X number of active taxpayers, but then again, on this other side, it does not translate to the numbers that we expect. So that then necessitated the cleanup. And we believe that even as we're onboarding on items, so you see, going forward, we will plug the gap or stop the bleeding, as I like to call it, that we will correct it going forward. As long as you're in items and everything remains above board. But then we still remain with a bigger problem of cleaning up the register. So one, putting on the special table. It is important to note at this point that placing a taxpayer on the special table is not supposed to be punitive. But it's also for us and for the benefit of the taxpayer, because we have received concerns where a taxpayer is saying, yes, this is my PIN, but I did not make that transaction. So there's a possibility someone actually utilized a PIN that was perhaps idle and was used to, carry out certain transactions that are not known to the taxpayer. So it is a process, I would say, at this point, ongoing, but we do hope that with the going forward, and especially with the items implementation, that should also fast track, in the sense that it will actually push for a number of taxpayers with these concerns to come forward. Now, where this journey began, again going back to the same issue of a special table, a number of taxpayers came forth. Some paid fully to get them off the special table. Others admitted. You see, it starts with an admission, whether the number then is correct or incorrect. We have that conversation. Once we agree, then it becomes, the next question is, are you able to pay fully? We clean up your register, move you now back to your tax service office, or if you're not able to pay, we get into a payment plan. But the important thing is, which direction are we going? And then the bigger important issue is, we know you exist, we know you're operating above board, and you as a taxpayer has very good sight of your PIN and the operations thereon. Okay. Yeah.
Let's switch gears a little bit. I was utterly surprised by customs, a traditional art performer punching below its weight. And I'm just curious, Madam CG, what exactly transpired there first?
You rightly said it, that yes, customs has historically always met and surpassed its target. And we expected the same, not just in June, throughout the year, largely so. But month on month, this didn't quite happen for a myriad of reasons. But the key thing, and this goes back now to the time when Kenya had drought. And there was then the need, from a policy perspective of government, to cushion a number of Kenyans from, hunger. There were huge exemptions that were gazetted on certain products. So whereas certainly from a government perspective, a positive thing, to cushion Kenyans from the impact of hard economic times, then the government went ahead to gazette and to grant exemptions on a certain number of products. So exemptions on import duty, rice, sugar, maize, cooking oil, yellow maize, fertilizer. just to mention but a few. And these products, if you look at the exemptions just from import duty alone, those exemptions amounted to 27.1 billion. Yeah. Now, again, from a VAT perspective, again, based on sugar, the reduced import duty, just, some probably a couple of millions shy of a couple of tens of millions shy of 1 billion, so about 960 million. Other exemptions, if you look at them, largely amounted to about 87.9 billion. So I would say largely, when you look at the exemptions, that had a direct hit and dip in the customs numbers. Now, moving on to the exemptions, when we started the year, and before this was largely corrected by the government-to-government importation of oil, fuel, before that there was the issue of dollars, scarcity of dollars, the impact, first scarcity, and of course the impact, of dollar shortage and even the changes the market. And this certainly directly had a direct effect on the petroleum products and other products. And with that, because of the delay, you see, when you know that a certain shipment of petroleum is coming in on a certain day, that is revenue that is known, it is locked in. And even as we start the month, you know that it's either 8 vessels, it's 10 vessels, and the timelines for which when the duty is due is known. So that is a number that is locked in. So when that is delayed, maybe because there's a shortage of dollars and the importers are not able to access that in time, it means they're not able to pay the shippers for then the petroleum to be discharged. That in itself causes delay. So you'd find that yes, the revenue will be collected, but because of the delay in collecting, it is not put in the very month for which it had been targeted or estimated that it would come in. Now, for us in KRA, and especially when you look at customs, and likely I'll say KRA, is that revenue collected on 30th of June is very different from that collected on 1st of July. So yes, it is all revenue, but they take completely different shapes and forms because of how then we account for the revenue. Because it's either you met or you did not meet. Yeah.
Interesting. And still on customs, in March this year, there was the notice from KRA on consolidation of cargo. And there was hue and cry out here. And I'm just curious, when you look at these numbers, how have they reflected based on the consolidation discussion?
The issue of consolidation and deconsolidation of products or imports, as you said, maybe let me start from March because it has its own long history. But that conversation started in March in the sense that we have over time gone back to the drawing board using statistics from the past to see whether the collections, again, are optimal or not. What can we do differently? And again, focusing on customs, it's not just about revenue collection. Remember, there's a balance of revenue collection vis-a-vis trade facilitation. So what has happened then with the consolidators is that there are those ones who bring goods are imported through the airports. Case in point, in this case, the JKIA and Eldoret International Airport. And then there are these goods that come through the port, Kilindini. Yeah? So containerized cargo. So again, going back to the balance of trade facilitation, ideally, with goods that are imported, you should be looking at the unit value of a product. But then it begs a question, to what extent can you do then 100% verification vis-a-vis facilitate trade, grow the economy, and as such collect more, whether it is through customs or through domestic tax, because you see these are goods coming in, yeah? Now, we had certain rates. We had pegged certain rates based on the imports either through the airport, like I said, or the containerized cargo at the port. And these rates were bumped up. We call them the benchmark rates. They were bumped up in March. But again, as you're aware, there was hue and cry of probably the lack of conversations, engagement, stakeholder engagement, sensitization on moving these rates up. Now, we agreed that we will maintain status quo at the time and instead push the start date to June. So first, to answer your question, this was never implemented in March. So that moved to 1st of June. Yeah? And even as this moved to 1st of June, we had engagements with the consolidators, yeah, at different levels. I have personally actually met them as recent as sometime in June. Now, so what does that mean? It means what then you'd have anticipated or expected to have come through in March was delayed, yeah, and the implementation was done in June. Julians, that is not to say that it was easy or has been easy. It has come also with its own fair share of challenges. And this is something I think in the public domain because we are also putting out communication out there on what to do going forward. But it is important for me to note, and especially the cargo coming through the airports, and case in point in this case, we're talking about maybe Eldoret International Airport. Whereas we've been trying to work from, and having honest conversations, yeah, with our importers, mainly consolidators, we have noted a significant level of undervaluation or lack of full disclosure in the declarations. Okay, now let me just break it down a little bit. So what we have done is say general cargo, be it garment or loose items, household goods, coming through the airport, we will collect taxes at 270 shillings per kilo. Now that also includes what we now call the feature phones. Some people out there would call them likamwizi, but we prefer to call them feature phones. Now, those ones taxes would be collected on them based on kilo weight, right? Now, for other goods, excisable goods, perfumes, cosmetics, smartphones, you're talking about iPhones, Samsungs, name it, the high-end smartphones, electronics, computers, laptops, TVs, name it. Those ones then, duty will be collected based on unit value. You'll agree with me, and just use this as an example, duty on the feature phone, as I'd said earlier, that goes probably for about 2,000, 2,500 in the market, cannot be the same as that of an iPhone 14 Pro Max that goes for upward of 200K. All right? Now, what we have seen, and it's very unfortunate, is that there's a lot of concealment that one could easily bring the smartphones, as I've described, and then use that weighting to say these are X number of feature phones. And as such, then pay 270 shillings based on kilo for goods that are upward of 200 plus K. When we realize this large level of a huge concealment and under declaration, we decided to halt the release of some of the cargo, especially, like I said, at Eldoret International Airport, and we went for 100% verification. This is an exercise that happened way from May all the way into June, and it caused a delay. Yeah, because then again we went back to the same conversations. And sitting with our partners across the table, again, there was also to some extent admission that yes, it could have happened, whether knowingly or unknowingly, but we agreed on certain measures, and some were like what I'm saying, loose cargo, general goods, etc. 270, but the others then to be based on unit value. And that has happened, and since we have so far verified, actually 100% verification item by item, And we've released quite a bit of the cargo that is being charged duty based on the weight. Some taxpayers or some consolidators have since picked their goods out of this other category that I'm talking about. It is slow, but it is happening. KRA has no problem at all with the importer. KRA has actually no problem with the consolidator. But then between us and the importer, the person stocking their shop, there is this consolidator. So requesting the importer to encourage their consolidator to come forth based on what I've explained to accelerate clearance of their goods.
Madam CG, two quick follow-up questions there. One is that in your own estimation, how much money do you think the authority was foregoing, or rather, Kenya was foregoing through this concealment of products when it comes to consolidation? And what proportion of goods have been cleared so far?
I would say maybe that is work in progress. We're still at the tail end of that, so probably not quite. I'm not quite in a position to give a number as of now. But one small example, and this is an example I've shared, was an item that was cleared and the duty was paid of about 85,000 shillings. But subsequently, as a result of the 100% verification, additional duty was collected over 700,000. That should paint a picture of how much we are losing.
DST, quite some good performance from what I saw from the report, but I have a question for you, Madam CG. When I look at the numbers of DST, I ask myself, in an environment where we are now talking about transitioning to Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, do you see these as a sustainable source of strong revenue, if I could say, for this country?
I would say yes, without actually batting an eyelid, yes. When you look at the discussions on Pillar 1 to Pillar 2, and I will not even go much into that much of a detail, but where the conversations began, and looking at it from a global perspective, first it started from a defense perspective, that we should not apply our rates, and it was seemingly as if we were applying on some either targeted countries, for lack of a better word, without saying, we go into too much detail. But what we have since done, we have continued conversations with the concerned parties, again on the same issue of Pillar 1, Pillar 2, with the concerned parties to try and break down what DST, and even if you say VAT on the digital marketplace supply, so largely DST, what it means for us as a country, and more importantly, to demystify that we are not targeting particular entities from certain jurisdictions. For us, it's blanket application that, looking at our laws, our taxes are applied based on source, income derived or accrued in Kenya. So this is income derived or accrued in Kenya. Granted that we might have missed it because of how to monitor it, how do you quantify it, etc., etc. But we are getting wiser, and of course with engagements with the relevant stakeholders. But back to your point, the bigger conversation was, why is DST targeting certain jurisdictions or certain entities from certain jurisdictions? I would tell you largely, it's a conversation, it is work in progress. But for now, I think I can confidently say that we have largely demystified the fact that it is not targeting anyone, it is not targeting any country, and as such, it should not impact any policies between Kenya as a country and any other country's policies. It should not affect that relationship that we have with other countries, because all we are doing is applying the DST rate to all entities or anyone, not entities, anyone deriving income or accruing income in Kenya, just as our laws provide.
CG, did I miss it, or we didn't capture how CGT performed?
CGT, you will recall CGT until January, until December 2023. Yeah, so 31st of December 2023, CGT was at the rate of 5%. And then come 1st of January 2024, 2022, 31st December 2022, it was 5%. Come 1st of January 2023, it moved to 15%. Again, at that time, especially during December, I think the racing against time to quickly, lodge documents and pay and declare, there was a quick upward trajectory of the CGT. Now, going back to the performance of CGT, we collected 5.6 billion in the just ended financial year. This was a performance rate of 88.1%. Yeah, so certainly nowhere near where I would have wanted it to be, but then a growth, very interestingly, a growth of 72.2% year on year. So in the preceding year, we had collected 3.26 billion. So moving from 3.26 to 5.6. Growth, 72.2. Again, attributed maybe largely to the policy shift in terms of the rate. Now, again, whereas that probably would have been seen as a pain point for many, moving from 5 to 15, you look again at our neighbors. Our neighbors' rates are at 30% on average. Yeah. So I think the more important thing is we are working again as we continue engaging our taxpayers and sensitizing them on matters to do with lodgement, declaration, and accurate declaration, because again, that has been a troublesome point. So revenue has grown, if you look at it from the positive side. Revenue collection, not on point. We are especially looking at technology. What else can technology help us? In what way then technology can help us to drive CGT as a tax head?
But CG, to be fair, even as we benchmark with our regional peers, indexation in Kenya remains a very topical and heated discussion. Don't you think there's a case there?
There is a case. And that then again should address the issue of 15 or 5 to 15 versus 30. So remember, we started at 5. And it was the same conversations about indexation, right? Yes. Otherwise, then we should have said, we are doing 30% across the region. Why can't Kenya move from 5 to 30? If you remember, there was a time it moved from 5 to 10. There was a pushback. It went back down. But this time it was moved from 5 to 15. But again, very alive to the fact that indexation must be taken into consideration. Others, you look at some probably property someone inherited. And to them, Julians, you inherited a shamba somewhere. That's a zero value to you. But perhaps depending on the location of the shamba, it doesn't matter where, you will sell it at a certain value. So the assumption is it will be 5% or 15% slammed on the full amount, yeah, assuming there are no allowable deductions on it. So policymakers are alive to that fact. Otherwise, then would have pushed for a bump.
Siji, let's talk about ADR. And I know this is a pet topic for you. Looking at the throughput in terms of the volume of cases, which was cited, I think 7,400 and something, I would have expected a higher yield. What shape and form did this take?
Now, ADR over time, ADR was put in place to demonstrate a certain friendly side of KRA. Yeah? Contrary to what many people believe, that we can actually sit around a table, agree to agree, resolve a matter amicably, but then, Julians, what probably from where you sit you don't see is that it is not always the case that when a case goes to ADR, then it has revenue. It could easily go to ADR, but come out as 0 or 1% or 10%. So this begs the question, why? A number of things again. The appeal process for a tax dispute is timed. What do I mean by that? You see, when we are carrying out an audit, there is back and forth. KRA would come in, carry out either physical audit or an audit based on data. So data-driven audits. And depending on the conversations and the back to back and the back and forth conversations and the documents adduced to then justify certain taxpayer positions, it reaches a point where an assessment is raised. The minute an assessment is raised, both parties lose their luxury of back-to-back because then time begins to run. Now, when KRA raises that an assessment, in this case the assessor, if you say a commissioner raises an assessment, then there is a window for the taxpayer to object. So a 30-day window in the case of domestic taxes for a taxpayer to dispute. And when you're objecting, it means you're objecting with facts that I disagree because of 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, when that window, now you see at that point, what we've noticed is, sadly so, sometimes during the back and forth, some information is not provided. But at this point when time is running, because now we've started the appeal process, the taxpayer would object within 30 days. Commissioner has 60 days within which to respond. Then, depending on the outcome, if the taxpayer is still aggrieved, then there is that other window of sending a notice to the commissioner, 30-day notice, that I intend to go to the Tax Appeals Tribunal. And then another 14-day window saying that now I'm submitting my documents to the Tax Appeals Tribunal. And you see, the minute the case leaves the Tax Appeals Tribunal, High Court, Court of Appeal, could easily go to the Supreme Court, depending on the matter at hand. Now, you see, in all that I've painted, ADR is not featuring. So KRA brought in that baby called ADR, no longer a baby, a grown man or woman by now, to try and plug that gap and say, do we really have to go through this process? But then, at the same time, reminding the taxpayer that don't lose sight of your rights of appeal. Because if, for example, within the 30-day window of objection, if a taxpayer does not object, the assumption is, from our side, is that you've conceded. We quickly move in and enforce and collect. When the commissioner now confirms the assessment, and remember this is done by an independent party, so the assessment could have been was raised by a different commissioner, but the discussion and appeal and confirmation is done by somebody else. Now, if the commissioner at that point does not confirm within the 60-day window, again, the assumption made there, or the law clearly gives a prescription that if that's not done within 60 days, then it is taken to have been the ruling or the objection or the outcome in favor of the taxpayer. So when an assessment is raised, after the back and forth, however short or long, the taxpayer has a 30-day window within which to object if they intend to. Now, if they don't object at that point, the assumption is they've conceded. Now, the taxpayer, this is a right prescribed in law. When they object, then the commissioner has a 30-day window within which either to confirm the assessment, okay, or to accept the objection, basically confirming, saying that I still insist status quo remains and this money is due to KRA. Or accept the objection and drop it fully or partially, depending on the objection and the supporting evidence. Now, if the taxpayer is still aggrieved by the outcome of the 30-day window, and again, needless to say that the 60-day window, if the commissioner does not deal with it within the timelines, the law is very clear that this will be interpreted to the benefit of the taxpayer. So in other words, the commissioner at that point loses or has ceded. Let me use the word ceding as opposed to losing. Once that happens, now if I look at it now from the domestic tax side, is if the taxpayer is still aggrieved after the 60-day and the objection decision, they have a right of appeal to the Tax Appeals Tribunal. So they give the commissioner 30-day notice of intention to appeal. And then at the back of those 30 days, there's a 14-day window within which to make their submissions to the Tax Appeals Tribunal. And that cycle goes on and on. So after the Tax Appeals Tribunal, High Court, Court of Appeal, and likely to the Supreme Court, depending on the subject matter. Now, going back again to the aspect of ADR, if you see, in what I have painted, there is no mention of ADR. But whilst we are doing this as it being the tax collector and the taxpayer, each party needs to reserve their right of appeal. Now, the taxpayer, the fallback is these timelines have to be ticked until the matter is placed before the Tax Appeals Tribunal. Now, when it is placed at the Tax Appeals Tribunal, you see now the timelines, that tribunal doesn't have clear timelines that in 10 days you should have cleared this case or whatever, unlike the 30 and the 60 when the matter is still within KRA. So at that point, once the taxpayer has landed at the Tax Appeals Tribunal, it's at that point the taxpayer can actually say, I want us to have this conversation outside the court process. Now, historically again, it's a taxpayer who's been asking. But increasingly, KRA has reached out to say, why do we really have to drag each other? You're wasting time and money, and so are we. Why can't we meet around the table and have this conversation? So it comes back to the cases that you cited. Over time, probably going back to 2015 was not so much. It largely picked up around 2018. 7,458 cases. What again, you've quoted X number of yields, 72B. In the last year, we collected just about, I think, 15.2 billion. And to address your question, could it have been more? I would say yes and no. Why? ADR is a good thing. Looking at the picture that I've painted of what then it seeks to achieve. So it's not just about the revenue. It's about having cordial conversations, improving our relationship with taxpayers, showing that it can be done without being acrimonious, etc., etc., you can name it. And of course, the cost aspect. Now, there are instances where a case can go to ADR. It has gone through the long haul all the way to the TAT, but then it finds its way back to ADR. Remember, ADR consensual, both parties have to agree. Now, when it comes to ADR, you'll find that maybe an assessment could have been raised on the wrong premise. Maybe due to a lack of access to information, could have been raised based on bankings. Yeah, we are seeing these bankings. Can you then explain the basis of your income, etc., etc.? But probably the answers were not forthcoming. As I said earlier, in some instances, it could just be slow, whether deliberate or otherwise. In some instances, I'd said earlier again, failure to provide information in a timely manner. Because even for us as tax people, is that we have certain SLAs, yeah? Service level agreements. You know, you can't leave a case years, months on end. You know, certainty is also required. So because of that, it reaches a point where you need to draw the line and say, now I'm raising the assessment. But then at that point, information has not reached you, which then subsequently is provided at ADR. Now, there could be cases of data-based audits, where I would look at certain data. For example, I see a withholding tax certificate on your ledger. By the time I'm seeing a withholding tax certificate on your ledger, Julian, it means someone paid you money. Deducted 15%, assuming it was consultancy within the country. I just want to get my 25%, Julians. That's all. Now, that is a straightforward one. There are instances where you see patchwork of a hanging number here, a hanging number there. It could be withholding VAT. It could be anything. Yes. Withholding VAT, 6% or 2%. Yeah, in this case, the balance has not been remitted and we work backward. But sometimes you find, based on these data-driven audits, maybe the conversations or the interrogation of the numbers does not happen adequately for whatever reason. It could be on our side, it could be on the taxpayer side. But then when the reality dawns on all parties and the matter has gone the full haul, it's either we wait for it to go to TAT and we argue out our case and you argue yours. And you know, when it gets to TAT, that's like arbitration, unlike what we do in mediation, where mediation is a conversation, we agree to agree or agree to disagree. Yeah. At TAT is more of arbitration where a party has to win. So it can go either way. So the reason why sometimes you don't see the numbers like that is it is important for us not to look at ADR as a revenue yielding tool. Revenue yielding, certainly good. The other aspect is that revenue then comes in sooner rather than later, but then there could have been gaps that could have been sealed during assessment that unfortunately so are sealed at this point of ADR. So then there's a...
Madam CG, we have 12 minutes to go, so let me do this very fast. First is that exported services are now zero rated. Are we prepared for the refunds?
First, when you talk about zero rating, chances I know you're referring to the Finance Act. So again, sub judice, I don't want to discuss the Finance Act, Julians. But I'll answer your question on refunds. Zero rating of services is a global phenomenon, okay? Just that what we have seen increasingly again in our jurisdiction is that as we stand now, prior to the change in law, the zero-rated services, exported services are not zero-rated as it stands now, okay? So there was something about us outsourced services, and it was not very, yes, it wasn't very clear what it was and all, but globally. And the idea behind it is to ensure that services from Kenya remain competitive. Otherwise, it's zero-rated, you apply 16% on it, then to some extent, yeah, it loses its competitive edge. Now, aside from that, refunds. Refunds, again, a historical issue that we've had. One, because what we have, you look at the law as it stands now, based on the Finance Act 2022, is that it's not just services that are zero-rated, exported services that are zero-rated. There are a myriad of other things, yeah, even products. And as such, then, that has had a huge impact on the refunds. Because remember, you are charging whether, and when I say a myriad of things under the current finance, basically under the current Income Tax Act as it stands based on the Finance Act 2022, is that you either exporting or you are selling a product at zero rated, even if it's locally within the country, you are selling a product, but you're not charging VAT, yet you're claiming VAT based on your input. So increasingly, you'll always largely be in a refund position. Julians, to be very honest, it is a problem that we've had in the sense that, see, even for the VAT, we may process the refunds, but until KRA is funded, we are not able to pay. So yes, you'll know it is due to you. It is very straightforward. It has been processed. Where documents have been provided. Everything is done, but unless we are funded, then we are not able to pay. So what we have now is a case where we have huge refunds having been processed, double-digit billions, that have not been paid. What happens going forward? Why don't we wait until the Finance Act? We are allowed to implement the Finance Act, and we will cross the bridge when we get there.
I see. Madam CG, going back to 1995 when KRA was started, you're the first female holder of this office. Two questions here. One is, how do you feel about it? And secondly, have you reapplied for this position?
Julians, I'll start with your second question. On your second question, I think the deadline was 21st of July. Why don't we wait and see? What's the date today? 17th? 17th. Yes. It's just 5 days out. And we will know what the answer to your second question. On your first question, how does it make me feel? I would say the initial reaction is a mix of emotions, but I would say it's a good thing for a number of stakeholders. What do I mean by stakeholders? And I'm not talking about tax stakeholders here. One, I would say the girl child. It's a no-brainer. I would tell you, Julians, the pressure I've felt in some instances is not even about revenue pressure, it's more of social pressure. That can it be done? It has never been done, as you rightly put it. So one, it's exciting. It just shows it can be done. It's not about your gender. It's about whether you're capable, whether you're focused, whether you can do it, whether you can stay the course and you understand the business and the task at hand. 3, that even as I look at the girl child, sometimes at some point we go all out on girl child, and sometimes we blame the men for forgetting the boy child, right? But when I look at the girl child, for me, it's an encouragement to them that certain things are not the preserve of the other gender. Just again to remind the girl child that we are enough, yeah, and we can do it. And largely so, even when I have daughters, I am always reminded, even by the stakeholders in my own house, that there are people looking up to you. That don't be the first one, because people, there's a tendency, as we say, it has always been done by X. You see, it should have remained that way. So that can always come. But I think for me, the important thing is to say it can be done. It may not have been done in KRA, but it has been done in other quarters. You've seen many women picking up senior leadership positions. And for me, it is an encouragement to the girl child. It's not about age. It's not about gender. It's about staying the course. It's about remaining focused. As long as you have the relevant support that you require and you're clear of the direction you're going, it can be done, and we are enough.
Rispah Simiyu, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, William. Thank you very much.
And that takes us to the close of our conversation with Rispah Simiyu. We have been unpacking the numbers for FY 22-23 as far as tax revenue collection is concerned. Now we look forward to 23-24, and KRA has indicated a very ambitious target. We wait to see how that pans out. Stay tuned to Business Redefined.